Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about Deadpool, the X-Men, Cloak and Dagger, Tales from the Floating Vagabond, and just all sorts of stuff. But before we get into it, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, and leave a comment. We've got an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you guys. Thank you so much for being here. With all that said, let's dive in. The prologue to today's game session is a recap of a few relevant moments from previous games. In the early 1950s, a group of the 13 most unbeatable villains to ever appear in our game world traveled back in time, wanting to reboot the timeline in a way that would benefit them. Several heroes from the modern day went back and tried to stop them, but the villains won, and most of those heroes were killed. One hero, though, named Eldridge, sought out help from the Time Variance Authority, who had the Infinity Gems in their desk drawers, which they use as paperweights. It turns out that the reason for this was that when you take an infinity gem from its native dimension, it begins to lose power. So the gems that the TVA had were either completely powerless or soon would be. Eldridge gathered up all the gems she could get her hands on, while the TVA had their hands full with problems the villains had caused. And she went to the one man who she knew would be alive in 1952, who had always been a friend to the superhero community, John Redbridge. So she gave him the gems, which he in turn used to track down the gems native to that time and place. The gems from the TVA were almost powerless, but one of the few things they could do is help him hone in on the healthy gems from 1952. So what Eldridge didn't know, though, was that she gave him the gems during the darkest period of his life. When McCarthyism was running rampant in America, the Hellfire Club had recruited John Redbridge. And as such, he became the Red King. And his story was the old cautionary tale about how absolute power corrupts absolutely. About 30 years later, Jean Grey became the Dark Phoenix, and the Red King tried to recruit her for his Hellfire Club, which was now operating out of the hottest nightclub slash bar in all of New York City, Studio 54. The Red King had been secretly seducing various female characters, and he had built up quite a harem for himself. One of his many wives was Black Widow, who had been a spy for the Soviet Union. Now she was a spy for the Red King, serving as one of the Avengers, telling the Red King everything they were doing. And if they ever suspected him of anything, Black Widow would then steer them in a different direction. Likewise, Dazzler was his spy on the X-Men team. And it was Dazzler who lured Jean Grey and several other beautiful X-women to Studio 54, where the Red King planned to seduce them and add them to his ever-growing harem. But things went wrong, and Jean Grey seemed to destroy the Hellfire Club once and for all. The Red King and his harem retreated to one of his many tropical estates, where they laid low for a while. After some time went by, the Red King ordered Dazzler to bring him more attractive superheroines. So Dazzler brings him Dagger, aka Tandy Bowen. In our world, Cloak had died at this point, and Dagger had become a member of the X-Men. So Dagger is brought to this tropical paradise, and the Red King does seduce her, but the devil is in the details. And Dagger was played by Dave Eckelberger, who argued that just because Dagger may now be madly in love with the Red King, that doesn't actually mean she would have any inherent inclination towards evil. So Dagger shoots the Red King, and he doesn't take a single point of damage. Rather, when Dagger hits him with her light daggers, he is purged of foreign substances like drugs and alcohol, which he would have been full of at that time. But the light daggers also repair whatever is wrong with that character. So this undoes what the Ghost Rider of Rome did to him, where he lost all of the powers that he had from Changeling the Dreaming. So he's a changeling again with all of the fairy arts. But more importantly, Red King has what TSR's old Marvel Superheroes role-playing game would refer to as negative popularity, which is how, through game mechanics, they represent the idea that people are mad at him for all of the bad stuff he's done over the years. So while under the influence of the light daggers, he quote unquote repents, which is the terminology that TSR used, and it reduces the negative popularity to 0, which means people don't like him or dislike him. They're just neutral towards him in terms of like the general public. So shockingly, as a result of this, the evil is purged from the Red King, which, by the way, Dave Eckelberger loved doing stuff like that. He always thought it was super interesting to cause these unusual moments to happen in a role-playing game. So in this case, he wanted to see what happens when you've got this evil villain with this harem, you know, and the idea was Dave wanted to force them to be lawful good characters suddenly. So it was like, what now? Right? Do you divorce them all? Do you abandon all those kids that you fathered? Like, what's the lawful good thing to do in this situation? Which reminds me, I guess I forgot to mention that Dagger really does love him. That's how the Valentino effect works from Tales from the Floating Vagabond, which is a role-playing game we're going to be referencing a lot in this adventure. But so Dagger loves him, but she wants him to be a good man. And she wants everyone else to be good too. So everyone gets hit by light daggers until the characters formerly known as the Hellfire Club, none of them are evil now. And like I said, we had no idea what that would look like. So I started simple. The hero, formerly known as the Red King, would feel the need to serve others and be more humble because of all the guilt that he would feel for his past sins. So rather than be a king, he would want a more down to earth position. But also, now that he's a changeling again, he's starving because according to Changeling the Dreaming, they need what that role playing game refers to as glamour, which is basically pleasure. And that's what got him started down the wrong path to begin with. But in order to just exist, he needs to be around people who are having a good time. So that, at least, got us moving in a direction. So that brings us to the main plot of this game session. There currently is no Hellfire Club, in both the sense that there is no organization called the Hellfire Club, but also in the sense that there is no building, no nightclub, no bar, nothing. So on this tropical island resort that John Redbridge owns, he builds a tiki bar and he names it the Continuum Bar and Grill. or the CB&G for short. One of the characters here is Thaddeus Kalick Walker, who was a member of an alien race that more or less looked like man-sized insects. And he builds a special bar door that works a little bit like a Stargate. And on May 28th of 1984, the CB&G opens for the first time on Memorial Day. Various humanoid aliens wind up in the bar because the bar door here summoned them from ordinary bar doors elsewhere in the universe that they were trying to walk through. This works a little bit like that teleporter that Reed Richards built at the end of Secret Wars. Dagger and Dazzler have a connection to the hero formerly known as the Red King, who now we will be referring to as the bartender. Anyway, so Dagger and Dazzler are here. And if I remember correctly, Dazzler was played by James Porch. Dagger was for sure played by Dave Eckelberger. And one of the first patrons to walk through that door is Deadpool, who's played by Chris Croce. And this is actually Deadpool's second appearance in our game. The first is when we ran the Hulk versus Wolverine fight, which was set about 10 years before this one takes place. Anyways, so an alien named Sloot walks into the CB&G. And when he talks, he sounds exactly like John Lovitz. He is a gray-skinned, rubbery creature that looks a little like an octopus, but he has eye stalks, kind of like a snail. So no sooner than this bug-eyed monster enters the bar, his pursuers enter as well, hot on his trail. They are human women who resemble the cheesecake pinups of the 1950s, complete with retro dresses and white aprons, and their chrome laser rifles gleam in the multicolored lights of the tiki bar. Also here are Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler, and Colossus. Wolverine and Nightcrawler are both drinking beer when the housewives come in and open fire. Colossus stands between them and Sloot, so when the laser blasts hit, they put holes in Colossus's street clothes, but they don't harm his body of metal any. The women take more shots with their ray guns, this time missing and hitting a nearby jukebox, which starts playing disco music, which Dazzler loves. Storm shoots a lightning bolt at one of them, declaring knockout damage only. The housewives are wearing portable force field generators, so they only take 3 points of damage. On Nightcrawler's turn, he grabs Sloot and teleports them both outside onto the beach, which you can see through these wide rectangular windows in the front of the tiki bar. You know, it's looking out over the ocean and the sand here, the beach, and people playing on the beach and all that. On Deadpool's turn, he attacks the jukebox and says Disco is dead. Dazzler then goes, and she too does 3 points of damage, so the first housewife is knocked out. The bartender confiscates her ray gun and hides it behind the bar. Wolverine uses his claws on the force field generator of one of them, damaging it. And these gadgets, by the way, do not have hardened defenses, which means if the gadget takes a single point of damage, it will quit working completely. After that, Wolverine just punches this one out. Nightcrawler grabs one and teleports high over the water outside, letting go of her, so she drops in the ocean. Then he teleports back down to the beach without getting wet himself. One by one, Deadpool and the X-Men knock out the attackers. And after all the bad guys are down, Deadpool claps and says, "Good job, team." Wolverine growls and says Deadpool ain't on the team. But Deadpool insists that he's one of the X-Men now. The actual X-Men disagree, but Deadpool can't be convinced otherwise. Anyways, so they question Sloot, and it turns out that his race came to Earth in the 1950s and abducted 18-year-old girls, which was, of course, a classic 1950s B-movie trope. The bug-eyed monsters took them as wives and did something with their technology to slow down the aging of these women. And now the abductees are angry married women who control Sloot's planet, which is a world called Drawberg. Deadpool says, see, that's what you get for getting married. So the former alien invader asks Deadpool and the X-Men to help him. I should also probably mention that Longshot is here, giving Spiral dirty looks as she pours multiple drinks at once with her 6 arms. And Longshot's power is a form of probability control. Also here is another hero named Zach Jorgensen, who has the same power that Longshot does. And up until now, they've been playing darts, which, by the way, is super boring because all they ever throw are bullseyes. But point being, the fact that you have 2 guys who alter probability fields and reality, and they're in the same place at the same time, means this adventure is going to get weird. So as an example of this, Sloot orders a drink called a singularity. The bartender mixes it up, and it's super acidic. And due to the probability fields here, the drink develops sentience and scurries away under a table. Deadpool refers to the little acid monster as cute and suggests that they name it after Germany's leader in World War II. As a brief aside, we played this shortly after my son was born, and every time the baby made noise, Dave Eckelberger reacted to that little slime monster in the game as if it was a sound that it had made. So there's an argument to be had that this little monster is the first character that my son ever played. Anyways, so I bring up probability fields because even though the X-Men might not normally feel like coming to Sloot's aid, this time they do. So Sloot, Deadpool, and the X-Men use the bar door, and this is the first time we really see it used for this purpose. And this confuses a lot of people. So I'm going to describe this in extra detail. So Wolverine's in the Tiki Bar, which is located on a beautiful tropical island. Wolverine walks towards the door of the Tiki Bar, which is made of metal. It's high tech. There are windows here. And if you look outside, out in front of the bar, is the ocean. So thus far, this makes sense, right? Wolverine enters the door on this side, but Wolverine walks out of the door of a bar on Sloot's planet. Wolverine is no longer on Earth. He's on Drawberg. This is what the CB&G's bar door does. It is designed to link up with other bar doors on other worlds. Think of it like a Stargate. And just like how a Stargate will only connect with other Stargates, the CB&G's bar door will only connect to another bar door, no matter how far away that bar door is. As always, if someone doesn't get the idea, that's fine, right? Let me know in the comment section and I will try to do a better job of explaining it. Once my players got the hang of it, they loved it. But for a lot of players, when they first encounter this concept, they are very confused by it. Okay, so moving on. The PCs use the bar door to go to the planet Drawberg. They walk out of a weird drinking establishment on Drawberg that is way more low-tech than they were expecting. It comes off more like something from the Ewok village on Endor. The X-Men ask Sloot where they are, and he says they are in the forest of Yon Shuf Ya-Ar. Several more bug-eyed monsters that look just like Sloot gather around the X-Men. Sloot explains that these other bug eyed monsters, or BEMs, are what constitutes the rebellion here on Drawberg, and that they want their freedom. Sloot tells his fellow aliens that the X-Men are here to liberate them. And Deadpool introduces himself as the leader of the X-Men. So Storm corrects him and says she's the leader. Then Deadpool tells the rebels that they look like the California raisins. If the California raisins die, then grew sprouts like an old potato. The BEMs aren't sure what to say to that, so Deadpool tells them that what he called them is a great honor where he's from. So again, very similar to what we see in Star Wars, there's this big celebration because the BMs get excited that their problems are going to be solved very shortly. But that night, a group of the human women that they abducted in the 50s, who are still relatively young, right? Not as young as they were when they were abducted, but not as old as they should be in the 80s. They track down the rebels and they attack the encampment using the BEM's own technology against them. So the women have ray guns and jetpacks and all sorts of ultra tech gear, right? So because of this, Deadpool and the X-Men and the BEMs are forced to enter a cave system, which again is like very Dungeons and Dragons, to flee from the domestics and their chrome ray guns, etc. In the caverns, the X-Men encounter mechanical creatures that look kind of like Sloot. So Nightcrawler is confused and he asks Sloot why the robots on this planet look like him. Sloot asks Nightcrawler what androids on Earth look like, and Nightcrawler says basically they look like us. So Sloot explains that on Drawberg, the robots were built to look like bug-eyed monsters. So everywhere, people who build robots must build them in their own image. Deadpool says he never understood why anyone would build robots that didn't look like a hot chick. Uh, he said instead they built these things to look like a chrome version of a depressed scrotum. Anyways, their conversation is cut short because the domestics reprogrammed the robots and the robots attack the PCs, which is a problem. Each of the robots has Dr. Octopus style tentacles, and each one of those tentacles gets its own turn. Deadpool, of course, says he spent enough time working on secret government bases to know a little something about an anal probe from an alien. Then he asks the robots to be gentle with him. Anyway, so the robots actually manage to knock out Deadpool and the X-Men. The player characters wake up in what sort of looks like an office building and they're confused, but then slowly they realize that the longer the human women were here, the more they wanted things here to look more like things on Earth looked. So the headquarters of these women looks just like an old office building that looks like something out of the TV show Mad Men. Deadpool says he bets the women also wallpapered the inside of their flying saucers, added curtains, some shag carpet, a woman's touch. Also, when the robots brought the X-Men in, the human women misunderstood. They're acting under the impression that the X-Men are all regular human beings since they're all wearing street clothes. They didn't go to a tiki bar dressed for battle. So, as soon as the X-Men wake up, they use their mutant powers, and freeing themselves is super easy, barely an inconvenience. The X-Men search this building, and while there is a trapdoor in a storeroom that leads to an underground chamber, a la the Fallout franchise, they don't find it. Instead, the X-Men and Sloot get their hands on a flying saucer, and when they enter, Deadpool is delighted to find that his guess about the saucer's interior was correct. He names it the Home Sweet Home, then does his best impression of Destroy All Humans. So the saucer fires death rays at key areas while the human women are all out in the forest rounding up the aliens. So interestingly enough, the problems on Drawberg seem to be solved. Then the X-Men try to fly home in the flying saucer. because again, my players were initially very confused about how the bar door worked. So, anyways, as they're flying back towards Earth, they encounter space pirates. These villains are patterned after the father of Cyclops and Havoc, who is Corsair, and his crew, the Starjammers. So the X-Men fight the space pirates, and they do win, but their ship is damaged. So say they set down on an alien planet for repairs. The spaceport here is called Sulphur City, and the X-Men's first stop is a space bar called the Nova Agogo, where again there is a bar door. So the way home is right here, but they ignore it. Instead, they learn that this spaceport is a haven for space pirates and underworld types like you might see in Star Wars. Bounty hunters, smugglers, etc. And just as Jabba the Hutt was a gangster on Tatooine, there are organized crime organizations here too. In fact, there are basically two Jabba-like characters who hate each other, and each one wants the other one dead. One is named Sulek, and he's reminiscent of Marvel's character Man-Thing. The other one is named Vino, and technically he already died, but he has a very powerful psionic mind that refuses to abandon his former body, which is contained in a glass cylinder. His body has decomposed and liquefied, and he basically haunts it, right? And Deadpool really wants to drink it. Anyways, so Sulek's office is in the highest tower here overlooking the starport. The X-Men's ship needs repairs, and that costs credits. Sulek has credits and will pay them for the repairs if Deadpool and the X-Men retrieve something for him. Storm asks what this object is, and Sulek says it is made of green-colored crystal and shaped like a mollusk. Nightcrawler asks why anyone would want such a thing, and Sulek says it's a rare antique, very old, and he's been trying to get his hands on it for 40 years. So if they find it, he'll pay them. So the X-Men explore the various dive bars on this planet until eventually they find the green mollusk statue at what seems to be the alien equivalent of a pawn shop. And of course, this is one of many businesses owned by Vino, the psychic entity that Deadpool wants to drink. And it turns out that Vino wants a recipe from a local chef, but it's a family recipe, and the only thing that would ever make him give it up is if the love of his life took him back. And her name is Sonia. So the X-Men go find Sonia, who is now just a brain in a jar. But she has speakers and cameras on the jar and stuff so she can communicate. They win her over by making a series of dice rolls using the charisma persuasion skill. She and the chef get back together. The chef gives them the recipe, which they give to Vino, who gives them the statue, which they give to Sulek, who in turn pays for the ship to be repaired. And Deadpool says he hates these missions where you got to give the mouse some cheese, so it will give you the fish, which you give to the cat. So the cat will give you the bone that you can give to the dog. Deadpool says this stuff is just tedious. It is a waste of everybody's time. Which brings us to the epilogue. The X-Men's ship is repaired. Deadpool drinks Vino, and they launch. They continue on for a while, eventually needing fuel. So they set down on a planet called XL4, where they encounter a silver-aged hero named General Jupiter. General Jupiter is a lot like the early appearances of Mar-Vell the Kree. He tells them he's not as strong as he used to be, and he could use their help with a local problem. It turns out there are bad guys on speeder bikes, and it's basically Star Wars meets Mad Max. And they're raiding local farms and stuff, and they need dealt with. So the X-Men lend General Jupiter a hand, which is weird Because just as they have giant sandworms in Dune, on XL4, they have gigantic larvae of Sidious salt titans. So the X-Men ride the giant larva and defeat the Raiders. General Jupiter refuels their ship, and the X-Men continue towards Earth. Finally, after all is said and done, they get back to Earth, where they land the flying saucer next to the CB&G, and they walk in through the bar door. Deadpool tells the bartender about all their adventures. The bartender reminds the player characters how the bar door works and points out that they could have just walked through a bar door on Drawberg and skipped all that other stuff, which really aggravates them. So Nightcrawler orders a German beer, Colossus orders vodka, Wolverine lights up a cigar, and the adventure ends almost exactly the way it began. So that was actually a module called Weirder Tales of Space Opera for a game called Tales from the Floating Vagabond by Avalon Hill. It was written by S. John Ross, and admittedly, we took a lot of liberties with it. But that said, we love Tales from the Floating Vagabond the way that we run it. And 20 years ago, in 2004, we ran it almost every day that summer, starting on Memorial Day. So that's why in our game, Memorial Day is the first day the CB&G ever opened. And since I'm a child of the 80s, every chance I got, the heroes of the week, it was always kind of different heroes every time in a CB&G adventure. Heroes of the week found a way to use that bar door to have an adventure based on almost every single 80s comic book or TV show or cartoon you could possibly imagine. And our players loved that, and they are super nostalgic for this era of our game. So on our end, we really liked this one. Hopefully you liked hearing about it. If so, as always, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, and leave us a comment. From all of us here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.